She bought lunch for a black man with her last dollar, not knowing he was her future fiancé. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. It was a chilly Wednesday afternoon, the kind of day when the sky was overcast and the air felt sharp as if the winter was just waiting to pounce. Sarah, a young woman in her early 20s, sat on the cracked curb outside a busy city cafe, clutching her stomach. She had worked overtime the previous night and had just enough to get by, but as she checked her wallet, she realized she didn't have enough for lunch. She had only one crumpled bill left, but it wasn't enough for the meal she wanted. Her stomach growled in protest, and she sighed, debating whether to buy a cheap sandwich or hold on to the money until later. As she sat there, a man walked by. He looked disheveled, his clothes worn out, his shoes mismatched. He was holding a large cardboard sign that read, "Will work for food." Sarah hesitated for a moment, then decided. She stood up, feeling the cold wind sting her cheeks, and approached him. She couldn't help but notice the way he carried himself. His posture was tired, but there was a certain dignity in the way he moved. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice hesitant. "I don't have much, but I can buy you lunch if you're hungry." The man stopped and turned to her, his tired eyes meeting hers. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The world around them seemed to fall away, leaving just the two of them standing in that quiet moment. Then, with a small smile, he nodded. "Thank you," he said softly. "That's very kind of you." Sarah smiled back, feeling a warm glow in her chest. She didn't have much, but the act of giving, however small, made her feel better. She walked with him to the cafe, and together, they stood in line, making small talk as they waited for their meals. Sarah couldn't help but notice how calm he seemed, despite the rough exterior. When it was their turn, she ordered a sandwich for both of them, and as they sat down at a nearby table, she learned more about him. His name was James, and he had fallen on hard times after losing his job. He had been trying to make ends meet, doing odd jobs wherever he could. "I didn't expect to meet someone like you today," Sarah said, taking a bite of her sandwich. "What do you mean?" James asked, raising an eyebrow. I guess I thought you'd be more upset, or angry, or something. But you're not. You're calm, almost like you've accepted things for what they are." James chuckled softly. "I've learned that getting angry doesn't change much. The best thing you can do is keep going, no matter what." Sarah looked at him, surprised by the wisdom in his words. They continued talking, and before long, the conversation turned to their lives. She shared her struggles too, how hard it was to make ends meet, the feeling of being stuck, never quite reaching the place she wanted to be. James listened intently, his eyes compassionate. As the meal came to an end, Sarah stood up, feeling a sudden sense of connection with this stranger. "I should get going," she said, reaching for her bag. "It was nice meeting you, James. I hope things get better for you." James stood up as well, smiling gently. "Thank you for the meal, Sarah. I'll never forget it." As she walked away, Sarah felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. Little did she know, that small act of kindness was the beginning of a much bigger story, one that would change her life forever. "I didn't expect to see you again," Sarah said, her voice softer now, as she walked into the small cafe where she had first met James. It had been 2 weeks since that lunch, and the memory of their conversation stayed with her more than she realized. She hadn't seen him since that day, but somehow, the idea of him lingered in her thoughts. She had tried to forget about it, but life had a way of weaving people's paths together in the most unexpected ways. As she stood at the counter, ordering her usual coffee, she felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned around to see James standing there, smiling. His face looked different this time, more relaxed, like he had found a sense of peace she hadn't noticed before. "You came back," she said, surprised but glad to see him again. "I didn't think I would, honestly," James said, his voice genuine. "But something about that day stuck with me. It was more than just a lunch, you know? It felt like something meaningful." Sarah nodded, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "I've been thinking about that too. The way you were so calm. It really made me stop and think about how I handle things." They sat at a table by the window, sipping their drinks in comfortable silence for a moment. The cafe was quiet, with only a few people chatting softly in the background. The sound of the rain against the window made everything feel cozy and intimate. "I've been looking for a job," James said, breaking the silence. "It's been tough, but I've been doing some odd jobs here and there. Slowly getting back on my feet." Sarah looked at him, impressed by his determination. "That's great. You know, I've been thinking about getting a second job too. Things aren't easy at the cafe, but I can't afford to sit still." James smiled, his eyes sparkling with a new light. "You know, if you ever need help with anything at all, don't hesitate to ask." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected him to offer help, but the sincerity in his voice made her believe he meant it. "Thank you," she said, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. "That means a lot." James hesitated for a moment before continuing. "I know this might sound crazy, but I've been thinking about what you said that day. About being kind to people, even when it's hard. It got me thinking about my own life and how I've been letting things slip by. Maybe it's time to make some changes." Sarah felt a rush of emotion as she listened to him. He wasn't just talking about his job or his life. He was talking about his soul, about what it meant to be a better person. She saw him in a new light now. He wasn't just the man she had bought lunch for that day. He was someone who was trying to change, to grow. "It's not easy," she said, her voice thoughtful. "Life never gives you the easy path. But sometimes, the right thing to do is the hardest thing. And you're right. It does start with small acts of kindness." James nodded, a determined look in his eyes. "I know I've got a long road ahead, but I'm willing to take it. And maybe, just maybe, that road will lead to something better." Sarah smiled. She hadn't expected to find such inspiration in someone she barely knew, but here she was, sitting across from James, feeling like they had both discovered something important together. It wasn't just about lunch anymore. It was about two people finding hope in each other, a connection that went beyond the surface. James leaned back in his chair, his gaze thoughtful. "You know, I think we're both on the same journey, trying to figure out where we belong. Maybe it's not about the destination, but about the people we meet along the way." Sarah's heart warmed at his words. She had always believed that people came into her life for a reason, but she had never truly understood it until now. "I think you're right," she said quietly. "Maybe it's the people that make all the difference." The conversation drifted naturally from there, both of them sharing more about their lives, their dreams, and the small victories they had won since their first meeting. The rain continued to fall outside, but inside the cafe, there was a sense of warmth between them. As they finished their drinks, James stood up and gave her a nod. "I'll see you again soon, right?" he asked with a smile. Sarah smiled back, feeling something shift within her. "I'm sure of it." And with that, James walked out of the cafe, disappearing into the rainy afternoon, leaving Sarah with a feeling of hope and possibility she hadn't felt in a long time. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she was excited to find out. "I'm not sure what I was expecting, but it wasn't this." Sarah had been so focused on just getting by, surviving, that she never really considered how much more there could be to life. She had always lived with her back against the wall, moving through her days on autopilot. But something had changed when she met James. A spark, a flicker of possibility that she hadn't noticed in years. 2 weeks had passed since they shared lunch, and today, as Sarah walked into the same cafe, she felt the weight of the small moments that had led her to this point. The sky outside was still gray, and the air had a cold bite to it. But inside, the warmth of the cafe felt different today. She couldn't explain it, but it was as if something was shifting inside her. When Sarah sat down, she saw James already at the counter, looking more like himself than he had the last time she saw him. His face, once marked by the tiredness of struggle, now showed a glimmer of hope. He turned as she walked in, and his eyes lit up when he saw her. "Sarah," he greeted her, his voice calm but warm. "It's good to see you again." Sarah smiled, feeling a little more relaxed in his presence than she had before. "You too, James," she replied, settling into the seat across from him. She could see it now, the change in him. "How's everything going?" she asked, hoping he would share more of his story. James leaned back slightly, his eyes thoughtful. "It's been tough, but I've been getting work. Odd jobs, nothing stable yet, but enough to get by. I'm feeling better though, like I'm finally finding my way." Sarah nodded. She understood more than he realized. She'd been in a similar place, where everything felt like it was out of reach. But now there was something about James that made her believe he would make it through. "I'm glad to hear that," she said quietly. "Really, I am." There was a long pause between them, the kind of silence that felt more like a shared understanding than awkwardness. The noise of the cafe around them faded, and it was as if it was just the two of them in the room, connected in a way neither had expected. "You've been on my mind a lot," James said after a moment. His voice was low, but there was an intensity in it that made Sarah's heart skip a beat. "When you said that thing about kindness, about how we have to give even when we don't have enough, it really stuck with me. I haven't been able to stop thinking about it." Sarah felt her chest tighten, not with discomfort, but with a warmth that spread through her. "I meant it," she said softly. "Sometimes, the only thing we can control is how we treat others. I don't know, it just feels like it's worth it, even if you don't always see the result." James nodded, his expression serious. "That's what's been keeping me going. Every day, I keep thinking about that." "You were right." He took a deep breath and looked at her. "I want to change, Sarah. I know I've messed up, but I'm trying to get better." Sarah felt a surge of something inside her, a rush of emotion she hadn't expected. "You don't have to do it alone," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We all have moments where we mess up, but that doesn't mean we can't try again." James' eyes softened, and he reached across the table, his hand resting lightly on hers. The touch was brief, but full of promise. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "That means more to me than you'll ever know." Sarah smiled, the weight of her own struggles feeling just a little lighter in that moment. There was something about James, something about the way he believed in change, in the possibility of redemption, that made her feel like maybe, just maybe, they could both find a way to escape the darkness that had been hanging over them. "You don't need to thank me," she said, squeezing his hand gently. "I think we're both just trying to find our way." They sat there for a while, talking about their lives, their dreams, and the things that scared them. Sarah realized, in that moment, how much she had been missing out on, how much she had been holding back. There was a future here, one she hadn't been able to see before. It was a future that didn't seem so impossible anymore. James was no longer just a stranger who had needed a meal. He was someone who was changing, just like her. They had both been lost, in different ways, but maybe now they were finding each other. And that made all the difference. "I was just starting to believe that things might be getting better." The past few weeks had been different. Sarah had started to feel like maybe, just maybe, the world wasn't as cold as she thought. She had met James at the cafe, shared that moment of kindness, and since then, they had kept in touch. There was something genuine in the way he spoke about his struggles, his effort to change, and his desire to become a better person. And she found herself slowly opening up to him, more than she ever had with anyone else. Their connection, fragile at first, was beginning to strengthen. The days began to blur together as she worked at the cafe, still getting by, but feeling a little lighter with every conversation she had with James. The two of them would meet every few days, often just to share a cup of coffee or walk around the neighborhood. They were never in a rush, and it felt like time had a different pace when they were together. But even with all these small moments, Sarah still held on to the feeling that her life wasn't quite where she wanted it to be. James had come into her life like a gust of wind, shaking things up, making her question what she truly wanted. And yet, every time they spoke, he seemed to give her more clarity. That afternoon, as she wiped down the counter at the cafe, Sarah's mind wandered to what he had said during their last conversation. "Maybe we should stop trying to predict the future," he had told her, "and just live in the moments we have." It was a strange thing to hear from a man who had been through so much, but there was wisdom in his words. Sarah had always been the planner, always thinking ahead, worrying about what might go wrong. But in the past few weeks, she had started to realize how exhausting that was. Maybe it was time to focus on the now. Just as she finished wiping the counter, her phone buzzed. It was a message from James. "I found something today that I think will change everything for both of us. Meet me at the park at 6. Sarah stared at the message, her curiosity piqued. What did he mean? What had he found? She couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement and nervousness. As the clock ticked closer to 6, she finished her shift, changed into something comfortable, and headed out to the park. The sun was just beginning to set, casting long shadows across the empty benches and pathways. It was a quiet evening, with only a few people walking their dogs or sitting on the grass. Sarah spotted James sitting on one of the benches, his back straight, his face lit up with an unreadable expression. As she approached, he stood up and smiled at her, but there was a certain seriousness in his eyes that made her stomach flutter. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice betraying the nervousness she was feeling. James gestured for her to sit beside him. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," he started, his voice steady. "About change, about kindness, about what really matters. And I've realized something." Sarah watched him closely, sensing that this wasn't just another casual conversation. This was something important. "I've been holding on to the past," he continued. "I've been letting the things I've lost define me. But I don't want to do that anymore. I want to create something new, something different. With you." Sarah blinked, not fully understanding. "What do you mean, with me?" she asked, her heart racing. James reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, folded envelope. He handed it to her. "This is for you," he said. Sarah took the envelope, feeling the weight of it in her hands. As she unfolded it, she found a letter, written in neat handwriting. She read it silently, her eyes widening as she took in the words. It was a letter of acceptance for a job at a prestigious nonprofit organization. The letter was addressed to her. "James," she breathed, looking up at him in disbelief. "How did you?" "I told you, I've been making changes. I reached out to a few people I know. They were impressed by your story, Sarah. They want to help you, just like I do. This is your chance. A real chance." Her mind raced, the implications of what he was saying sinking in slowly. This was more than just a job offer. This was a lifeline. It was everything she had ever wanted, but never thought she could achieve. She looked at James, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what to say." He smiled softly. "You don't have to say anything. Just know that I believe in you. I've seen the way you handle life, the way you've treated people. You deserve this." Sarah felt a tear slip down her cheek. It wasn't sadness. It was relief, hope, and a sense of gratitude she hadn't felt in years. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what I would have done without you." James reached out and gently touched her hand. "You would have done just fine," he said. "But I'm glad I could help." The park grew darker around them, the world fading away as they sat there, two people who had found each other at just the right time. For the first time in her life, Sarah didn't feel like she was running out of time. She felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. "I can't believe this is happening," Sarah thought as she looked at the envelope in her hands. It was hard to wrap her mind around the fact that everything was starting to change. The job offer, the new opportunities, it was all too much to take in. She had worked so hard for so long, just scraping by, and now it felt like life was finally offering her a chance to rise above the struggle. She looked across the table at James, who was watching her with a quiet intensity, his eyes full of hope and encouragement. "This is real, right?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. James smiled, a soft but knowing smile. "It's real. You deserve this, Sarah. You've been working for this moment without even realizing it. This job, this chance, it's all part of the next step." Sarah blinked back tears. She had always been afraid of the unknown, always worried about what could go wrong. But now, with James by her side, she felt like maybe, just maybe, things were about to get better. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, letting the weight of the moment settle in. The world outside the cafe seemed distant, like they were in their own little bubble. The rain had stopped, and the sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the city. "What now?" Sarah asked, her mind racing with all the possibilities. "You take the job," James said, his voice firm. "You go after it with everything you've got. Don't hold back." Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the tension in her chest slowly ease. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice small. "What if I fail?" James reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. "We all fail sometimes, Sarah. But it's not about how many times you fall. It's about getting back up. You've got the strength, the heart. You've already shown that." His words, simple yet profound, settled in Sarah's mind. She had always doubted herself, always wondered if she was good enough, capable enough. But maybe James was right. Maybe it wasn't about being perfect. It was about trying, pushing through the fear, and doing her best. She nodded slowly, her heart beginning to calm. "Okay," she said, a small but determined smile spreading across her face. "I'll do it. I'll take the job." James's smile widened, and for the first time in a long while, Sarah felt like she was making the right choice. The world seemed a little less scary, and the future a little brighter. As they finished their drinks and walked out of the cafe together, the cool evening air felt refreshing against her skin. It was as if the world was opening up for her, ready to embrace her new beginning. Over the next few days, Sarah threw herself into the job application process. She cleaned up her resume, drafted a thoughtful cover letter, and submitted everything with a nervous but hopeful heart. As she waited for a response, she focused on the small victories, the little things that made her feel like she was moving forward. Then, one evening, just a week after she had met James at the cafe, she received the email. She had gotten the job. The excitement hit her in waves, overwhelming her, making her feel like she was floating. She couldn't believe it. It was real. She had done it. She immediately called James to share the good news. "I did it. I got the job," she exclaimed, her voice full of joy. James's laughter filled the phone, warm and genuine. "I knew you would. I'm so proud of you." The next few weeks were a blur of excitement and nerves as Sarah settled into her new role. The work was challenging but rewarding, and she found herself growing more confident with each passing day. James was there every step of the way, offering advice, support, and encouragement whenever she needed it. It felt good to have someone who believed in her, who reminded her of her worth when she doubted herself. She had always carried the weight of her struggles alone, but now, she had someone to share the journey with. One evening, as they sat together at a small park bench, Sarah realized how much her life had changed in such a short time. The fear, the uncertainty, the doubt, it was all still there, but it didn't feel as heavy anymore. James had been right. It wasn't about avoiding failure. It was about keeping going despite it. "You're really something else, you know that?" Sarah said, looking at James with a smile. He raised an eyebrow playfully. "Oh, what's that supposed to mean?" "You've helped me more than you know," she said softly, her eyes sincere. "You helped me believe in myself again. And that's everything." James gave a small chuckle, his gaze softening. "I didn't do much. You were always capable. You just needed to see it." Sarah nodded, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for the connection they had built. She had started this journey on her own, but now, with James by her side, it felt like anything was possible. The future was no longer a scary unknown. It was a place where dreams could come true. And as she sat there, watching the stars begin to twinkle in the night sky, Sarah knew one thing for sure. She was finally ready to take on whatever came next. "I can't believe how much has changed in such a short time," Sarah thought as she sat at her small desk in the corner of her new office. The sunlight streamed in through the window, casting a warm glow on the room. She had settled into her new job with surprising ease, each day feeling a little more like she belonged. The work was challenging but rewarding, and she was surrounded by people who believed in her, something she never thought she'd experience. But even with all these changes, there was still something weighing on her mind. James had been a constant presence in her life since that fateful lunch, but she couldn't help but wonder what was next for them. Their connection had grown, but it was still uncertain where it might lead. She had never allowed herself to think too much about the future, but with James, it felt different. Sarah looked down at her phone, seeing a message from him. "I have something to show you. Meet me at the park in an hour." Her heart skipped a beat. She had no idea what he meant, but the thought of seeing him again filled her with a mix of excitement and curiosity. It had only been a few days since they last saw each other, but it felt like much longer. As she made her way to the park, Sarah's mind raced with possibilities. What could James want to show her? What was so important that he needed to meet her there? When she arrived, she saw James sitting on a bench, looking out over the small lake in the center of the park. He stood up as she approached, a smile on his face, but there was something else in his eyes, something that made her wonder if he was about to reveal something big. "Hey," she said, her voice soft. "What's going on? What do you need to show me?" James stepped closer, holding something behind his back. "I've been thinking a lot about you and me," he said, his voice low, almost hesitant, "about how everything changed the moment we met. How we both needed something, and we didn't even realize it. And then I thought, maybe there's more to this. More to us." Sarah's heart fluttered in her chest, her breath catching in her throat. She hadn't expected him to say anything like this, and for a moment, she wasn't sure how to respond. But before she could say anything, James pulled a small, delicate box from behind his back and handed it to her. Her hands trembled as she took it, her eyes wide with surprise. She opened the box slowly, revealing a small silver necklace with a simple pendant, a small key. "This is for you," he said softly. "I know it's not much, but it's a symbol of trust, of possibility, of opening new doors. I want you to have it, Sarah." She stared at the necklace, her mind struggling to process the gesture. It wasn't just a gift, it was something more, something that felt like a promise. "James," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what to say. This is so much." He smiled, his eyes gentle. "You don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know that I believe in you, and I want to be a part of whatever comes next for you. Whatever doors you want to open, I'll be there." Sarah felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She had never been someone who believed in fate or destiny, but in that moment, she couldn't help but feel like this was exactly where she was supposed to be. With James. With someone who believed in her, even when she couldn't believe in herself. She took the necklace and slipped it over her head, the pendant resting lightly against her chest. It felt like a connection, like a bond that tied her to this moment, to him. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice shaky. "I don't know what I would have done without you." James placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You would have found your way," he said, his voice steady. "But I'm glad I could be here for you." The two of them stood there for a while, not saying anything, but feeling everything. It was as if the world had paused for a moment, allowing them to savor the connection they had built. Sarah felt a warmth inside her, a sense of peace she had never known before. She had spent so much of her life doubting, questioning, and struggling to find her place. But with James, she felt like she was finally where she was meant to be. As they walked through the park together, Sarah felt a shift inside her. She wasn't afraid of the future anymore. She didn't know what would come, but she knew that, with James by her side, she could face whatever it was. They walked side by side, their steps in sync, the sound of their footsteps echoing softly on the path. Sarah had never felt so sure of anything in her life. She didn't know what the future held, but with James and the small key around her neck, she was ready to find out. "I can feel something shifting in the air," Sarah thought as she sat in her small apartment that evening, a cup of tea in her hands. It had been weeks since she received the job offer and accepted the opportunity that James had encouraged her to take. Her life was moving forward in ways she had never imagined, and yet, the weight of what was to come still lingered in the back of her mind. The small victories were adding up, but she knew she couldn't just sit back and let life happen to her. She had to make her own decisions. The key James had given her around her neck felt heavier today. It was no longer just a symbol of trust. It was a reminder of everything she had worked for, everything she was starting to build. The future was in her hands, and she didn't want to mess it up. Sarah had been so focused on the climb, the job, the change, the new people she was meeting, but she had been ignoring something just as important. Her family. It had been so long since she spoke to her mother, her only family left. They had grown distant over the years. Her mother had always been a complicated figure in her life. Sarah had grown up with a mother who was emotionally distant, who could never quite give her the love she needed, or maybe it was that Sarah had never felt like she deserved it. But as Sarah sat there, holding the warm mug in her hands, the distance between her and her mother suddenly felt unbearable. She hadn't called in weeks, hadn't made the effort, and that guilt was creeping up on her, gnawing at her insides. She could feel the weight of her decisions, the ones she had made to push forward and move away from the past. She didn't want to carry that weight anymore. It wasn't that she didn't love her mother, she did, but the relationship had always been complicated. And now, as she stood on the edge of this new chapter in her life, she realized how much of herself she had left behind to keep the peace. Maybe it was time to stop running from that. She needed to face it. She needed to call her mother. So she did. The phone rang 3 times before her mother picked up. "Sarah?" Her mother's voice was calm, but Sarah could hear the uncertainty underneath it. "Hi, Mom. It's me," Sarah said, trying to steady her voice. "I know it's been a while." There was a long pause on the other end. "I've been meaning to call, but things have been busy," Sarah continued, feeling like she needed to explain herself. "How have you been?" Her mother sighed, a sound that made Sarah's chest tighten. "You know, the usual. Busy. Work. You." "Same," Sarah replied, not sure how to bridge the gap that had grown between them. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, Mom, and I wanted to talk." Her mother didn't answer immediately, but Sarah could feel her presence through the silence. I miss you, Sarah added, her voice barely a whisper. I don't know how to fix things between us, but I want to try. I don't want to keep pretending like everything's fine. Sarah, it's just, I don't know how to make it better either. Her mother's voice broke slightly, and Sarah's heart ached hearing the sadness there. I know I haven't been the mother you needed, and I've carried a lot of guilt about that. But I've always been proud of you, even if I didn't show it in the way you wanted me to. Sarah let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. It's not about how you showed it, Mom, she said, her voice thick with emotion. It's just, I've spent so much time trying to figure things out on my own, trying to make up for what we didn't have. I guess I didn't know how to ask for what I needed. There was silence on the other end for a moment, before her mother spoke again. I'm sorry, Sarah. I never meant to hurt you. I thought I was doing what was best, but I see now that I was just doing what I knew. It's okay, Sarah said, her throat tight. We can't change the past, but we can start again, right? Maybe we don't have to fix everything overnight, but I don't want to keep pretending that I don't care. I want to try to make things better. Her mother's voice softened. I'd like that. I really would. Sarah smiled, her eyes welling with tears. It was the first time in years she felt like there was a possibility for healing, for reconciliation. After they ended the call, Sarah sat there for a long time, processing everything. She had made the first step, and it felt like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to happen overnight. But she was willing to try. And maybe, just maybe, it was time for her to open the door to her own healing. Just like James had shown her, sometimes you needed to trust that the right things would come when you were ready. And Sarah was starting to realize that she was finally ready to face the parts of her life she had been running from. The next few days were a whirlwind of new beginnings. Not just in her career, but in her relationship with her mother. They didn't have all the answers, but they were talking, and that was enough for now. Sarah had spent so much time building walls to protect herself, but now, with everything that had happened, she realized that those walls were keeping her from the very things she needed most. It was time to break them down, to let herself be open to the people who cared about her. And in that, she found the courage to take the next step in her life, the one that would lead her toward true healing, and toward a future she could finally look forward to. I'm not sure what I expected, but it wasn't this. Sarah walked through the doors of her apartment, her mind racing with the possibilities of what she was about to face. The conversation with her mother had been a turning point, but now she was facing something else. Something she hadn't expected. The reality of balancing her career, her personal life, and the weight of all the changes that had happened in the past few months. It was overwhelming, to say the least. But at the same time, it felt like a fresh start. Everything was shifting in ways she never imagined, and for once, it felt like she was in control. The phone buzzed in her pocket, interrupting her thoughts. It was a message from James. Hey, are you free to talk? I need to tell you something important. Can you meet me at the park in an hour? Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't seen James in a few days, not since they had their last deep conversation. She quickly typed back, I'll be there. The park was only a short walk away, and as she headed out the door, she tried to push away the anxiety that had crept up on her. What could he want to tell her? Was it something serious? When she arrived at the park, she spotted James sitting on one of the benches, looking out at the small pond. He was alone, his posture relaxed but his face serious. She approached him slowly, her nerves building with every step. Hey, Sarah said softly, sitting beside him. What's going on? What's so important? James turned to her, his expression unreadable. I've been doing a lot of thinking, Sarah, he began, his voice steady but tinged with something she couldn't place. And I realized something that I think you need to know. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, her hands clasping tightly in her lap. What is it? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. James took a deep breath before speaking. I've been hiding something from you, he said. Sarah's stomach dropped. The weight of his words hit her like a ton of bricks. What do you mean? Hiding something? She asked, confusion and fear creeping into her voice. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. This, he said, handing it to her. Sarah took the paper, unfolding it carefully. Her eyes scanned the words written there, and as she read, the world around her seemed to freeze. The letter was from the nonprofit organization she had been applying to, but it wasn't just an acceptance letter. It was a letter offering her a position at the highest level, something she had never even dreamed of. A position that came with more responsibility, more visibility, and more expectations. How did you know about this? Sarah whispered, looking up at him in shock. James's eyes met hers, full of sincerity. I didn't know exactly, but I knew you had it in you. And when I found out about the opportunity, I pushed for it. I made a call, Sarah. I wanted to help you get this. Sarah blinked, her mind racing. This wasn't just a job offer. This was a life-changing opportunity. One that could set her on a path she had always dreamed of, but never thought was possible. But it wasn't just that. It was the fact that James had been behind it. He had believed in her more than she had believed in herself. I don't know what to say, Sarah said, her voice shaking. I don't know how to process this. James smiled softly. You don't have to say anything yet. I just wanted you to know that I've been supporting you. Not because I feel sorry for you or want anything in return, but because I believe in you. You've earned this. Sarah's heart swelled, and the tears she had been holding back for so long began to fall. She had spent so much time feeling alone in the world, fighting battles on her own. But in that moment, she realized she wasn't alone anymore. James had been there, in the background, pushing her to be better, to see the potential in herself that she hadn't been able to see. I don't know how to thank you, she said through her tears, her voice thick with emotion. You've changed my life. I don't even know where to begin. James reached out and gently wiped the tears from her cheek. You don't have to thank me. Just take the opportunity. Do what you've always wanted to do. This is your moment, Sarah. For the first time in a long while, Sarah felt a deep sense of peace. She had been so afraid of the unknown, so unsure of what was possible for her. But now, with the job offer in hand and the support of someone who truly believed in her, she felt like she could do anything. As the sun began to set behind the trees, casting a golden glow over the park, Sarah sat there with James, letting the weight of the moment sink in. This wasn't just a job offer. This was the beginning of something new, something she had worked so hard for. And now, with James's help, she was finally ready to take the next step. Thank you, she said again, this time with a sense of quiet confidence. I won't let you down. James smiled, his eyes filled with pride. I know you won't. As they stood up and walked side by side through the park, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement for the future. It wasn't going to be easy, and there would be challenges ahead. But with James by her side, she knew she could face whatever came next. And for the first time, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. I never thought I would find myself here. Sarah stood in front of the large glass building, the towering headquarters of the nonprofit organization that had changed her life. The job she had only dreamed of was now a reality. And as she looked up at the modern structure, a mixture of awe and uncertainty washed over her. She had made it this far, but the next step felt just as daunting as the first. She had worked hard to get here, but now, the pressure of living up to expectations, her own and others, felt almost overwhelming. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, before pushing open the door and stepping inside. The lobby was bustling with energy, employees coming and going, talking about meetings, and working on projects. It was a world she wasn't used to, but it was quickly becoming her world. She was here. She was part of something bigger. As she walked to the elevator, her phone buzzed. It was a message from James. I know you're starting today. Just wanted to remind you that you've got this. You're going to do amazing things. I believe in you. Sarah smiled, her heart warming at the words. She had been surrounded by doubt her entire life, but James had always been there, a steady presence, supporting her every step of the way. He had believed in her before she had believed in herself. That thought brought a wave of confidence as she stepped into the elevator. The doors closed, and the hum of the elevator was the only sound in the small space. She looked at herself in the reflection on the elevator's wall, noticing how much she had changed. The woman looking back at her was someone she barely recognized, someone who had fought for her place in the world, someone who had chosen to believe in herself. It felt like a lifetime ago that she had been unsure of her own worth. The elevator doors opened, and Sarah stepped out onto the floor where she would be working. Her new office was bright and modern, with large windows that looked out over the city. She took a moment to absorb the scene. She was here. This was her future. As she sat down at her desk, her new colleagues greeted her with smiles and handshakes. It was a welcoming environment, one that felt foreign to her, but also comforting. She had been used to feeling out of place, but now, she was finally beginning to feel like she belonged. The day passed quickly, a blur of introductions and orientations. But Sarah kept reminding herself to breathe. She was taking it one step at a time, just like James had taught her. The pressure of the job was real, but for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt like she was up for the challenge. By the end of the day, Sarah was exhausted but proud. She had survived her first day, and she had done it on her own. There was no one else to lean on but herself. She had taken the leap, and now it was up to her to prove that she deserved to be here. As she left the building that evening, the city lights flickering around her, Sarah felt a sense of accomplishment she hadn't known before. The world was full of possibilities, and for the first time, she felt ready to take them on. James had been right all along. This was her moment. She had earned it. She had worked for it. And now, the world was waiting for her to make her mark. She had always doubted herself, but no more. She was no longer the girl who thought she wasn't good enough. She was the woman who had found her place in the world and was determined to keep going. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was ready. She had come so far, and nothing would stop her now. The future was hers to create, and she would do it with courage, confidence, and the strength she had discovered within herself. I didn't realize how much I needed a moment of stillness until I found myself in the quiet of my new apartment, the weight of the day slowly lifting off my shoulders. The past few months had been a whirlwind of changes, from starting a new job to reconnecting with my mom, and everything in between. The hustle, the pressure, the responsibility, it had all been a lot to handle. But now, in the silence of my home, I could finally breathe. I had made it. I had built this life from the ground up, and though it hadn't been easy, it had been worth every step. I looked around my apartment, noticing how it was starting to feel like my own space, my own sanctuary. The walls were bare, but there was something about the emptiness that gave me a sense of freedom, a fresh start. It wasn't just the job, or the apartment, or the newfound relationship with my mother that made this moment feel so significant. It was the fact that, for the first time, I felt like I was in control. I wasn't waiting for something to happen to me anymore. I was making things happen. The phone buzzed, and I saw James's name on the screen. I smiled, a sense of comfort flooding through me. We had both been busy with our own lives, but we made time to check in with each other regularly. "Hey," I answered, my voice warm. "How's your day been?" "Busy, but good," he replied, his voice full of that calm confidence that had always made me feel at ease. "I was thinking about you. How's everything going on your end?" I leaned back in my chair, looking out the window at the city below. "It's been good," I said. "I'm getting settled into the job. It's challenging, but I feel like I'm doing well." "I knew you would," he said with a laugh. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for." I could hear the smile in his voice, and it made me feel like everything was right. "You always say that," I said, a soft laugh escaping me. "But I'm starting to believe it, I think." There was a pause, and then James spoke again, his tone more serious this time. "Sarah, I've been thinking about something. You've made so much progress, and I'm really proud of you. But I want to make sure that you're not just pushing yourself for the wrong reasons." I felt a knot form in my stomach, a flash of uncertainty creeping in. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice quiet. "I mean that you've been through so much, Sarah. You've been building this new life, but I don't want you to forget what's really important, what makes you happy." His words hit me harder than I expected, and I felt my throat tighten. I had been so focused on the future, on all the things I was trying to accomplish, that I hadn't stopped to ask myself why I was doing it all. It wasn't just about proving I could do it. It wasn't just about the job or the apartment or even the money. It was about finding a sense of peace, a sense of fulfillment. But somewhere along the way, I had lost sight of that. I've been so focused on making things work, I admitted, on doing what's expected of me, that I think I forgot to ask myself what I really want. There was silence on the other end of the phone for a moment before James spoke again, his voice softer this time. "It's okay to slow down, Sarah. It's okay to take a step back and figure things out. You don't have to have it all figured out right now." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of his words. He was right. I had been rushing, pushing myself harder than I needed to. But maybe the real goal wasn't to keep climbing, to keep moving forward without pause. Maybe the goal was to find balance, to enjoy the journey, to take the time to appreciate what I had already built. "Thanks, James," I said, my voice thick with emotion. I needed to hear that. "Anytime," he replied. "You know I'm always here for you." We spoke for a few more minutes before we said our goodbyes, and I sat there for a while after the call ended, letting the quiet settle around me. It was strange, but for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was in a race. I didn't feel like I had to prove anything to anyone. I just needed to breathe, to take things one step at a time, and to appreciate the life I was building for myself. I wasn't perfect, and I wasn't going to get everything right. But I was trying, and that was enough. As the night settled in, I felt a new sense of calm. The world outside my window seemed peaceful, almost as if everything was in its right place. The future was still uncertain, and there would be challenges ahead, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready. I wasn't just waiting for the world to happen to me anymore. I was going to make it happen. I was going to find my own happiness, my own path, and whatever came next, I would face it with a strength I had finally found within myself. I couldn't sleep that night. The words James had shared with me earlier in the day kept running through my mind, echoing in the silence of my apartment. I had come so far, but now I was facing the reality of something I wasn't quite prepared for. The thought of the future, of making decisions that would affect not only me but others, had always terrified me. But what scared me more was the possibility of losing everything I had worked for. I knew that the job, the opportunity, the new life I had started to build could slip away in an instant. But there was something else too. A deeper fear that lingered quietly in the back of my mind. The fear of truly facing myself. Of confronting the parts of me I had buried for so long. The parts that were still uncertain, still unsure of where they belonged. And then, the phone rang. I reached for it quickly, almost instinctively. It was a message from my mother. I had called her a few days ago, and we had a meaningful conversation. But things still felt fragile. Our relationship was healing, but there was so much left unsaid. The message was simple. Can we talk? I need to tell you something. My heart sank. What was it now? What else was there to discuss? I had been trying so hard to move forward, to start fresh, but my past was always there, pulling at me, reminding me of everything I had left behind. I sat up in bed, staring at the screen. I couldn't put it off any longer. I had to face it. I had to face her. I quickly texted back, I'm free now. I'll call you. The phone buzzed in my hand again, and I didn't wait this time. I called her immediately. The phone rang a few times before she picked up. Sarah. Her voice was quieter than usual, hesitant, as if she was unsure of how to proceed. I need to apologize for everything, she said, her words coming out in a rush. I've been selfish, and I didn't know how to be the mother you needed. I've made so many mistakes, and I'm sorry for all the times I let you down, for not being there when you needed me. I felt a lump form in my throat. Her words were raw, honest, and for the first time in a long time, I could hear the vulnerability in her voice. Mom, you don't have to apologize, I said, the words almost choking me. I've spent so much of my life blaming you for everything that went wrong, but I know now that I've been holding on to all this anger for so long, and it hasn't helped. I don't want to keep carrying that around. There was silence on the other end of the line, and for a moment, I wasn't sure if she would speak again. But then, she did. I don't expect you to forgive me, Sarah. Not right now, anyway. But I just wanted you to know that I'm trying. I'm trying to be better. For you. For myself. I know I've failed you, but I don't want to keep failing. Her words hit me harder than I expected. I had always told myself that I didn't need her approval, that I could do this on my own. But the truth was, I had always wanted her approval. I had always wanted her to see me, to believe in me the way I had wanted for so long. I believe in you, I said softly, feeling a warmth spreading in my chest. I always have. There was a long pause, and then she spoke again, her voice trembling. I've missed you, Sarah. I know I haven't always shown it, but I miss you so much. I closed my eyes, my own tears falling now. I had spent so many years pushing her away, thinking that I could do it alone, but deep down, I knew I had always wanted a connection with her. I had always wanted her to be proud of me. I miss you too, Mom, I whispered, the weight of all the years lifting off my shoulders. Maybe we can start over. Maybe we can find a way to be a family again. I heard her choke back a sob on the other end of the line. I would like that, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I would like that very much. We spoke for a while longer, making plans to see each other in person soon. It felt like a new chapter, one I hadn't expected, but one I was willing to embrace. As I ended the call and set the phone down, I sat back in my chair, feeling a sense of relief I hadn't known I needed. It wasn't just about the job or the new life I was building. It wasn't even about the relationship I was developing with James. It was about the realization that I wasn't alone, that I didn't have to carry the weight of everything on my own. For the first time in a long time, I felt like things were finally falling into place. My career, my family, my life. Everything was changing, and I was ready to embrace it. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I knew that with each step forward, I was finding my way. I wasn't perfect. I wasn't flawless. But I was finally learning to let go of the past, to forgive, and to embrace the future with open arms. I woke up that morning feeling lighter than I had in years. The conversations with my mother, the work I had been doing, and the new chapter that was unfolding in front of me had all come together in a way that felt like a long-awaited breath of fresh air. The past few months had been an emotional roller coaster, from starting a new job to rebuilding the relationship with my mother and finding a sense of belonging that I hadn't known I needed. But now, as the sun streamed through my window and the world around me seemed to buzz with potential, I realized just how far I had come. I wasn't the same person I had been when I first moved to this city. I wasn't the girl who didn't believe in herself or who thought she had to do everything on her own. Now, I had a sense of direction. I had a support system. And most importantly, I had begun to believe in myself. The change wasn't just in the things I had achieved, it was in how I saw myself. I no longer felt lost or uncertain. There were still challenges ahead, but I knew I could handle them. It was an exhilarating feeling, and it was something I hadn't fully experienced before. As I sipped my coffee that morning, the phone buzzed in my pocket. It was James. I smiled before even checking the message. "Are you free today? I have a surprise for you." I couldn't help but laugh. He had a way of keeping me on my toes, always offering something unexpected. I quickly typed back, "I'm free. What's the surprise?" I couldn't wait to find out what he had in mind. It had been a while since we had done anything spontaneous. The work had been demanding, and we had both been so focused on our own lives that we hadn't made much time for fun. I knew whatever it was, it would be something memorable. The message came back almost immediately. "Meet me at the place where we first met." My heart skipped a beat. He was referring to the small cafe where we had shared that first lunch, the lunch that had changed everything. I remembered it so clearly. The way he had looked at me when I offered to buy him lunch. The way our conversation had flowed effortlessly, like we had known each other for years. I hadn't expected that moment to mean so much, but it had been the beginning of a bond that had only grown stronger with time. I stood up, quickly getting dressed and preparing to head out. My mind was already racing with possibilities. What could James have planned? And why was he taking me back to that moment? When I arrived at the cafe, I saw James sitting at a table near the window, looking out at the street. He looked up when I entered, his eyes lighting up with that familiar warmth. He stood up, and before I could say anything, he walked over to me, taking my hand in his. "I've been thinking about this moment a lot," he said softly, his gaze intense. "About how everything changed that day. About how much I've come to care for you and how much you've taught me about life, about love, and about myself." I blinked, surprised by his words. I had expected something fun or lighthearted, but this felt different. It felt real. "James, I started, unsure of what to say. But before I could finish, he gently cupped my face in his hands and smiled. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," he said, his voice steady. "Sarah, I want you to know how much you mean to me, and I want to ask you something." My heart raced as I looked into his eyes. What was he about to say? "I don't know what the future holds," he continued, "but I know that I want to share it with you. So I'm asking you, will you let me?" I could feel my breath catch in my chest, my heart swelling with emotion. "James, what are you saying?" I whispered. He smiled even wider, his eyes filled with sincerity. "I'm saying I want to spend the rest of my life with you, Sarah. You've changed everything for me, and I don't want to imagine my future without you in it." Tears welled up in my eyes as I looked at him, feeling a rush of emotions flood through me. This was the moment I had always dreamed of, but never thought I'd get. This was the person I had built my future with, the person who had been my rock, my support, and my partner in every sense of the word. "Yes," I said, my voice shaky but filled with certainty. "Yes, I want that too. I want to spend my life with you." James's eyes softened as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, delicate box. He opened it to reveal a ring, simple, elegant, and perfect in its understated beauty. "Will you marry me?" he asked, his voice low and full of love. I couldn't stop the tears from falling as I nodded, unable to speak, my heart full of joy. Yes, I repeated, this time with more conviction. Yes, I will marry you. James slipped the ring onto my finger, and in that moment, everything felt like it had come full circle. The journey we had started together had led us here, to this moment of pure happiness and love. We had faced challenges, uncertainties, and fears, but we had always had each other. And now, the future that once seemed so daunting felt like an adventure waiting to unfold. I didn't know what would come next, but I knew one thing for sure. I was no longer afraid. Because with James by my side, I was ready for whatever the future held. I thought I had everything figured out. The job, the relationship with James, the promise of a future we were building together. But life, as it always does, had a way of throwing curveballs when you least expected them. It started with a phone call, one I wasn't prepared for. It was late in the evening, and I had just finished dinner when the screen of my phone lit up with an unfamiliar number. I hesitated for a moment before picking it up, my gut telling me that something was off. Hello. I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. Sarah, it's me. It's your mother, came the voice on the other end, shaky and nervous. My stomach dropped. My heart was still healing from the recent conversations we'd had, but I wasn't expecting this. Mom, is everything okay? I asked, immediately sensing the tension in her voice. There was a long pause before she spoke again. I need you to come home, Sarah, she said, her voice breaking. There's been an accident. Your father, he's in the hospital. The words hit me like a punch to the chest. I didn't even know how to process what she was saying. My father? After all these years, after all the time that had passed since I last saw him, he was suddenly back in my life, and in the worst way possible. What happened? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He was in a car accident, my mother explained. It's serious, Sarah. They don't know if he's going to make it. I need you here. I felt a rush of emotions, anger, confusion, and guilt all mixing together. I had spent so many years running from the past, keeping my distance from my father and the pain that came with him. And now, here I was, being asked to come back, to face everything I had been avoiding. I'll be there, I said, my voice firm despite the storm inside me. I couldn't back away now. Family, no matter how complicated, had a way of pulling you back when you least expected it. I packed a small bag and drove to the hospital, the weight of what was about to happen settling heavily on my chest. As I walked into the sterile, white hospital hallway, memories flooded my mind. Memories of a broken home, of fights, of unresolved issues that I had buried deep inside. And now, I was here, facing the man who had been absent for so long, the man who had caused so much pain. I reached the ICU, where my mother was waiting. She looked tired, older than I remembered, her face drawn with worry and exhaustion. When she saw me, she rushed over, her arms wrapping around me tightly. I'm so glad you're here, she whispered, her voice shaky. I hugged her back, but inside, my mind was racing. I had so many questions, so many things I wanted to say to my father, but the reality of the situation hit me. He was here, on the brink of death, and I didn't know if I was ready for any of this. Is he awake? I asked, pulling away from my mother. She nodded, but her eyes were filled with tears. He woke up for a moment. He's been asking for you. The words felt like a dagger to my heart. My father wanted to see me? After all these years? The anger, the hurt, the abandonment I had felt all came rushing back. But still, something in me knew I had to go. I had to face him, for better or for worse. I walked into the room, my steps slow and deliberate. My father lay in the bed, pale and frail, hooked up to various machines that beeped steadily in the background. He looked nothing like the man I remembered. The years had not been kind to him. When he saw me, his eyes flickered with recognition, and his lips formed a weak smile. Sarah, he whispered, his voice hoarse. I froze for a moment, unsure of what to say. What could I say? Dad. I finally said, my voice barely a whisper. What happened? He tried to speak, but his breath was labored, and he coughed weakly before continuing. I don't have much time, Sarah, he said, his eyes locking onto mine. I've made so many mistakes. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything. His words hit me harder than I expected, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. All the anger, the resentment, the years of pain that I had carried suddenly felt like they were lifting off my shoulders. But at the same time, I felt something else, something unexpected, a sense of closure. I don't know if I can forgive you, Dad, I said, my voice trembling. But I'm here. I'm here because we're still family. And maybe that's enough for now. His eyes filled with tears, and he nodded weakly. That's all I needed to hear. I stayed with him for a while longer, talking about the things we had never said before, about the life we had both missed out on. The things I had kept inside for so long, I finally let them out. And in that moment, I realized that healing didn't have to come from a perfect resolution. It didn't have to come from a grand gesture or apology. It came from acknowledging the pain, the hurt, and the past, and allowing myself to move forward. I wasn't sure what the future would hold for my father, for me, or for my relationship with him. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had the strength to face it. And that, in itself, was the first step toward healing. I had spent the past few days in a haze of emotions. My father's condition had stabilized, but the wounds from years of estrangement were not so easily healed. The hospital visits had been long and difficult, and as I watched him struggle, I couldn't help but feel a mix of guilt and relief. Guilt, because I had kept him at arm's length for so long, and relief, because for the first time, I was finally facing him, the man who had been a stranger in my life for so many years. But even though we were talking more, I still couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. That old sense of uncertainty was creeping back in, clouding my thoughts. It wasn't just the situation with my father, though. It was everything. My career, my new life, and the relationship with James, all of it seemed to be moving so fast, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for it. I had spent years waiting for my life to take shape, and now that it was finally happening, I felt like I was losing control. The weight of responsibility was starting to feel like too much. I needed to take a step back and figure out where I truly stood in all of this. I needed a break. The opportunity came in the form of a weekend getaway, an invitation from James. To take a trip together, away from everything. At first, I hesitated. I was still processing so much, my father's situation, the job, my relationship with James. But after everything that had happened, I realized that I needed this. I needed to disconnect for a moment and just breathe. We decided to head to a small cabin in the mountains, far away from the noise and the demands of our daily lives. It was a place neither of us had been before, quiet and peaceful, just what we needed. The moment we arrived, I could feel the tension in my chest start to ease. The air was fresh, the sky clear, and the only sound was the rustling of the trees and the distant chirp of birds. It felt like a world away from everything that had been weighing me down. We spent the first day hiking through the trails, exploring the area, and just enjoying the quiet. There was no rush, no agenda. Just the two of us, walking side by side, taking in the beauty of nature around us. It was exactly what I needed. That night, we sat by a fire, the crackling of the logs in the fireplace the only sound in the cabin. James had brought along a bottle of wine, and we shared it, laughing and talking about everything and nothing. It felt so easy with him. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could just let go and be myself, without the pressure of having to be strong or in control all the time. "This is nice," I said, looking over at him. "It is," he agreed, his eyes soft in the glow of the fire. "You deserve this, Sarah. You've worked so hard to get here. You've been through so much." His words hit me in a way I wasn't expecting. I had been so focused on what was ahead that I hadn't stopped to acknowledge how far I had come. The years of struggling, the constant doubt, the fear of not being enough, all of that had led me here. To this moment, with him, in this peaceful place. "Thank you for this," I said, my voice quiet. "For everything. I don't think I say that enough." James smiled, leaning forward to take my hand in his. "You don't have to thank me. I'm just happy to be here with you." I could feel the sincerity in his words, the warmth in his touch. It was the kind of connection I had always longed for, but never truly believed I could have. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was enough. We spent the next few days at the cabin, just enjoying the simplicity of being together. The pressure of the outside world felt miles away, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I was able to relax. We woke up early to watch the sunrise, hiked to the top of a nearby mountain, and spent hours talking about our dreams, our fears, and everything in between. It felt like we were creating our own little world, one where nothing else mattered except for the two of us. By the end of the trip, I felt like I had gained something I hadn't even realized I needed: clarity. I had been so consumed by the noise of my life that I hadn't taken the time to listen to myself. But now, I knew what I wanted. I knew that I didn't have to carry the weight of everything alone. I had people who cared about me, people who believed in me, and that was enough. As we drove back from the mountains, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. I wasn't sure what the future would hold, but for the first time, I felt ready to face it. I wasn't going to let fear control me anymore. I had the strength to move forward, to continue building the life I had always dreamed of. And with James by my side, I knew I could face anything. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I had found my way, and I was ready to walk it with the people I loved. I woke up the next morning with a sense of urgency I hadn't felt in weeks. The peacefulness from the weekend had started to fade, replaced by a nagging feeling in the back of my mind. It wasn't just about the job anymore, or even my relationship with James. It was about what was next, and more importantly, how I was going to handle it. I had been living a life dictated by the expectations of others for so long, always trying to make up for what I thought I lacked. But now, standing on the edge of something big, I realized I had to stop looking back and start looking ahead. I couldn't keep running from the truth. I had to make some choices. I spent the morning at my apartment, trying to sort through the mess of thoughts swirling in my head. My phone buzzed, pulling me out of my reverie. It was James. "Can we talk? I've been thinking about something." His message was simple, but the words caught my attention. Something had been weighing on him too. I texted back, "Of course. What's on your mind?" I didn't know if it was the growing sense of change or the uncertainty I was feeling about everything, but I knew I needed to talk to him. As I walked toward the cafe we had visited countless times, I wondered what it was he wanted to discuss. I thought back to the weekend and how everything had seemed so perfect, so simple, just the two of us away from the chaos of the world. But now, that peace was being overshadowed by the tension in my chest. I couldn't help but feel like we were approaching a turning point, and neither of us could afford to ignore it. When I walked into the cafe, James was already there, sitting in our usual corner. His expression was thoughtful, and there was a certain heaviness in his gaze that made my heart skip a beat. He looked up when I walked in, and his lips curved into a small smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Hey," I said softly as I sat down across from him. "What's going on?" He leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest as he studied me. "I've been thinking a lot, Sarah," he began, his voice steady but serious. "About us. About what's next." I felt the knot tighten in my stomach. This wasn't just a casual conversation. This was a conversation about the future, our future. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. James hesitated for a moment before answering, his eyes never leaving mine. "I've been so focused on this dream of ours, of building something together. But I've been neglecting something else, something just as important." My pulse quickened. "What are you saying?" I asked, my mind racing. "I'm saying that maybe we need to take a step back," he said quietly. "I love you, Sarah, but I don't know if we're ready for what's coming next." My heart sank as the words hit me like a ton of bricks. The weight of his confession was almost more than I could bear. "What do you mean?" I whispered again, this time with more urgency, as if I could somehow understand better if I just heard it again. James took a deep breath, clearly searching for the right words. "I think we've both been rushing towards something without really talking about what it means. I've been so caught up in wanting to make this work that I haven't asked you what you really want, what we both really want." The room seemed to blur around me as his words settled in. I had never thought about it that way before. We had been so focused on moving forward, on the momentum of everything that was happening, that we hadn't stopped to check in with each other, to ask if we were truly on the same page. "I don't want to hurt you," he continued, his voice softening. "But I also don't want to rush into something we're not both ready for." I looked at him, my mind racing, trying to process everything he was saying. Was he saying that we weren't ready for this, for the future we had been dreaming of together? Or was he saying that I wasn't ready? I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breath. "I need to think about it," I said, my voice barely audible. "I need to figure out what I really want, too." James nodded, his expression softening. "I think that's the right thing to do," he said. "We both need to know that we're ready before we make any decisions." I couldn't breathe for a moment. The weight of his words settled heavily in my chest. We had spent so much time focused on what we could build together that we hadn't taken the time to reflect on whether we were both truly ready for it. The uncertainty was suffocating. But as I sat there with James, I realized that this wasn't the end. This was just another part of our journey. A necessary conversation to make sure we were both on the same path. It wasn't about avoiding challenges or pretending everything was perfect. It was about being honest with each other, about what we wanted and needed. And in that moment, I knew that whatever happened, we had made it this far together. And that meant something. I think we've both been scared, I said finally, breaking the silence. Scared of what happens if we stop. Scared of what might not work out. James's eyes softened, and he reached across the table, taking my hand in his. It's okay to be scared, he said gently. But we can't let fear make our decisions for us. I nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. It wasn't going to be easy. There were still so many questions, so many unknowns. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had the clarity I needed to move forward. Not alone, but with someone who was willing to face the uncertainty with me. Together, we would find the answers. Together, we would take the next step. I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing on the nightstand, and the moment I picked it up, I saw it was a message from James. I had just started to fall asleep after another long day at work, and his message brought me out of the fog of exhaustion. We need to talk. Meet me at the cafe in 30 minutes. My heart raced. What could this be about? I had barely spoken to him in the last few days, caught up in my own whirlwind of work and life. But the tone of his message told me this was more than a casual chat. I quickly got dressed and made my way to the cafe. As I walked through the door, I saw him sitting at our usual table, his eyes focused on his phone, though there was a noticeable tension in his posture. The moment he looked up and saw me, his expression softened, but it was clear something was on his mind. I sat down, waiting for him to speak first. Hey, he began, his voice quieter than usual. How have you been? Really? The question caught me off guard. I've been good. Just busy, I replied, watching his face carefully, waiting for him to continue. It's not that I don't care about what you've been going through, he said, his eyes locking with mine. But I've been thinking a lot about my own stuff, and I'm realizing I haven't been there for you the way you've been there for me. His words hung in the air between us, and I felt the tension in my chest ease just a little. What do you mean? I asked, unsure of where this conversation was going. I mean that I've been so focused on myself lately, he said, looking away for a moment. On my work, my own fears and insecurities, that I've been missing the bigger picture. I haven't been asking about you, your dreams, your goals. I haven't been giving you the space to talk about what you want out of life. I've been selfish. I felt a wave of empathy wash over me. I had been so caught up in my own struggles, in my own journey, that I hadn't even noticed how much James had been quietly carrying. The pressure, the doubts, the fear of taking the next step. But hearing him acknowledge it, hearing him say that he recognized it, made me feel like we were both facing our fears together rather than separately. James, I don't need you to have all the answers, I said softly. I just need you to be honest with me, and I need to know that we're in this together. He nodded, a small, grateful smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. We are in this together, he said, his voice steady. And I've realized that I've been holding back in more ways than one. I haven't been fully present for you, and I don't want to keep making that mistake. I reached across the table, taking his hand in mine. I'm here for you, I said, my voice full of sincerity. I'm not going anywhere. We both have our own fears to face, but we don't have to face them alone. He squeezed my hand gently, his gaze never leaving mine. You're right. We're stronger together. The conversation shifted then, from the heaviness of what we had just discussed to the lighter things, how our days had been, the things we wanted to do in the future. But something had shifted between us, a deeper understanding, a connection that had been missing before. When we left the cafe, I felt lighter, like I had just taken a deep breath for the first time in weeks. We were facing the future, together. It wasn't going to be perfect, and it wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time, I truly believed we could make it. The next few weeks went by in a blur of work, personal growth, and a lot of hard conversations. But something had changed. I felt like I was finally letting go of the fear I had been carrying, the fear that I wasn't enough or that I couldn't handle what was coming. I was learning to trust myself, and more importantly, I was learning to trust James. I had spent so much time protecting myself, keeping people at a distance. But now, with James, I was finally allowing myself to be vulnerable. The walls I had built over the years were slowly coming down. And it wasn't just about James, it was about me, about my own healing, about accepting the love and support I had been too afraid to accept before. I didn't know exactly what the future would look like, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid to walk toward it. The fear had started to lose its grip on me, and I was learning to step into the unknown with confidence. The next step in our journey together was uncertain, but it felt like we were both ready for whatever came our way. We had already faced our fears, and we had come out stronger on the other side. And that was something I never thought I'd be able to say. Life, with all its ups and downs, had led us to this moment, and I was ready to embrace it. Together, I could feel the tension in the air the morning of the meeting. Everything had led up to this. The conversations, the quiet reflections, the long nights spent thinking about what to do next. I had been moving forward, step by step, with confidence I hadn't known I had. And now, it was time to confront the last thing I had been avoiding, my future. James and I had grown so much together. The fears and doubts that had once clouded my mind had cleared, but now there was this new challenge, making a decision that would set the course for everything to come. I was standing on the edge of something bigger than I had ever imagined. The job was just the beginning. It had become clear that I was more than capable, more than ready. But was I truly ready for what came next? James had been my constant through all of this. His belief in me had given me the strength to push through my insecurities, but now, I could feel him pulling away. It wasn't that he had stopped believing in me. It was that he was giving me space to figure out what I wanted without any pressure. And that's what had caused the growing distance between us in the last few weeks. I had been busy with the job, with settling into my new life, and the more I focused on the future, the more I realized I hadn't checked in with myself. Was I really building something that I loved? Was I running toward a dream, or was I just trying to keep up with the expectations that had been placed on me? These questions swirled in my mind as I sat across from James at the cafe, the same spot where everything had started. He was watching me, his expression unreadable. We hadn't spoken much over the past few days, both of us avoiding the heavy conversation that had been hanging in the air. I finally broke the silence. James, I've been thinking a lot, I said, my voice steady but carrying the weight of everything I hadn't said. About us, about everything. He nodded, his eyes meeting mine, and I could tell that he had been doing the same. I've been thinking about it too, he said quietly. About where we go from here. What's next for us? I swallowed hard. This was the conversation I had been dreading. The one where we both had to acknowledge that we were no longer just moving forward together. We were moving into separate futures, and the paths were starting to look different. I don't know what the future holds, I said softly, my voice trembling slightly. But I know that I'm ready to make my own decisions now. To stop worrying about everyone else's expectations. James leaned forward, his eyes softening as he listened. Sarah, he began, his voice gentle. I've seen how hard you've worked to get here. I've watched you grow in ways I can't even describe. But you've always been so focused on what you thought was expected of you. And I've been so focused on being a part of your journey that I didn't realize you needed to make your own decisions, too. I blinked, surprised by the depth of his words. I do, I said, my voice stronger now. I need to figure out who I am, not just as someone who is working toward a dream, but as someone who's living that dream. I don't want to keep running in the direction everyone else wants me to go. There was a long pause as James absorbed what I had said. The air between us felt thick, heavy with the uncertainty of the moment, but also with the clarity that we were both moving toward something different. He reached across the table and took my hand, his grip warm and firm. I've always known you were capable of anything, Sarah. But I think you're right. It's time for you to take the reins. I can't walk this path with you the way I thought I would. I can't be the one to dictate your future. His words cut through me like a knife, but in a way that made sense. James had been my anchor, my rock, but now I had to learn how to stand on my own. I know, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I've been scared of that, of standing on my own, but I think I'm ready now. He smiled softly, his eyes full of pride and understanding. I've always believed in you, Sarah, and I always will. No matter what path you take, I know you'll make it your own. The weight of his words settled over me, grounding me in a way I hadn't expected. I had been so afraid of losing him, of losing the support I had come to depend on. But in that moment, I realized that I wasn't losing him. We were both growing, evolving, and that meant making space for each other's growth. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything I had been carrying begin to lift. I don't know where we go from here, I said, my voice steady. But I do know that I need to find my own path, and I want to do it on my own terms. James's smile grew wider, and he squeezed my hand. Then go, he said, his voice full of encouragement. Go and be everything you're meant to be. I nodded, a sense of peace filling my chest. I wasn't afraid anymore. The future wasn't certain, and I didn't know exactly where it would take me. But I knew one thing. I was ready to take the next step. For the first time, I felt like I was truly standing in my own power, ready to face whatever came next with courage and confidence. I was no longer chasing someone else's dream. I was chasing mine. I stood there in the quiet of the park, the city around me bustling with life, yet all I could focus on was the realization that I was standing at the beginning of a new chapter. The conversations I had had with James, the self-reflection, the way I had opened up to the idea of embracing my future had led me to this point. But now, I had to decide where to go from here. What did I really want? What did I need? The path ahead was no longer as clear as it once seemed. I wasn't sure where I fit in all of this. The career I was building, the family I was trying to reconnect with, and the deep connection I shared with James. Everything felt like it was in motion, and I was just trying to catch up. But I had never felt more alive than I did at that moment. I had taken control of my life, embraced my fears, and walked away from things that were no longer serving me. But now, the next step seemed almost impossible. I needed to balance everything: my career, my family, and my future with James. It was a lot, but somehow, it felt possible. I turned toward the familiar figure that had been by my side through it all, James. He was walking toward me, his expression thoughtful, his gaze soft. He looked like he had been lost in thought, and I realized he had probably been feeling the same way I had. There was so much we hadn't said to each other, so much unsaid, but we had both been carrying it silently. Hey, he said, standing beside me, his voice steady. How are you doing? I looked at him, seeing the concern in his eyes. I'm okay, I replied, but there was a hesitancy in my voice. I've just been thinking a lot. About everything. He nodded, as if he understood. Yeah, me too, he said softly. About us. About what comes next. I exhaled deeply. This was it, the conversation we had both been avoiding, the one that would define where we went from here. James, I know we've been through a lot together, and I know we've both changed, but I'm still figuring out what I want, I said, feeling the weight of my own words. I know where I am now, and I know I'm ready to move forward, but I'm not sure where I want to go. And that scares me. He smiled gently, taking my hand in his. You don't have to have it all figured out right now, Sarah. I'm here with you, and I'll be here no matter what you decide. But I also know that you're capable of making your own decisions. And I believe in you. His words, simple yet profound, brought a sense of calm I hadn't realized I needed. I had spent so much time worrying about the next step, fearing that if I didn't have everything planned out, I would lose my way. But in that moment, I realized that it was okay not to have all the answers. What mattered was that I was taking steps forward, even if they were small. What mattered was that I was moving in the right direction. Thank you, I said, my voice filled with gratitude. I think I needed to hear that. I've been so focused on getting everything right, on having everything fall into place, that I forgot it's okay to just take it one step at a time. He squeezed my hand, his eyes filled with understanding. Exactly. It's not about rushing to the finish line. It's about enjoying the journey, trusting that you're on the right path, even if you don't always know where it's going. We're in this together, Sarah. Whatever happens next, we'll face it together. A wave of relief washed over me. I wasn't alone in this. I didn't have to carry the weight of my future by myself. With James by my side, I could take on whatever came next. The future still felt uncertain, but now, it didn't seem as daunting. I knew that, no matter what, I would face it with courage, with hope, and with the belief that I could shape my own destiny. I'm ready, I said, looking into his eyes. I'm ready to see where this journey takes us. And I know it won't always be easy, but I'm willing to take it step by step. James smiled, his expression full of warmth. That's all we can do. We stood there for a moment, just taking in the moment, the weight of everything we had both been through. And then, without another word, We began to walk together, side by side. There was no more hesitation, no more uncertainty. For the first time, I felt like I had everything I needed to move forward, and I was ready to take the next step, whatever it may be. I didn't expect the sudden wave of emotions that hit me when I stood in front of the old house. It was strange how certain places had the ability to bring back memories, even when you hadn't planned on facing them. The house had been empty for years now, but as I stared at the familiar building, I felt the weight of so many memories, both good and bad, pressing in. I had spent so much of my life running from the past, convinced that moving forward meant leaving it all behind. But here I was, back at the beginning, the place that had shaped so much of who I was. My heart raced as I reached for the door, hesitant to step inside. I had avoided this place for so long, always telling myself I wasn't ready to face the things I'd left behind. But now, standing in front of it, I realized I had no choice. I had to go in. The door creaked as I pushed it open, and the familiar smell of the old house hit me. Dust and memories. The walls were worn, the paint chipped, but it still felt like home. I walked through the hall, taking in the quiet, the stillness that had settled in over the years. I had avoided this place, but in some ways, I had been avoiding myself. The girl I had been. The girl who had lived here, before everything changed. I found myself standing in front of the old living room window, the one where we used to sit as a family, looking out at the yard. I closed my eyes for a moment, remembering those moments of peace before everything fell apart. It felt so far away now, so distant. The arguments, the silence, the years of trying to fix something that could never be fixed. But here I was, no longer the same person I had been. I had changed. I had grown. The girl who used to sit in this room, afraid of what would happen next, was no longer here. I opened my eyes and looked around the room. It was empty, but somehow, it felt full of everything I had been trying to forget. I wasn't here to fix the past, to make it all right again. I was here to accept it, to face it, and let go. And as I stood there, in the quiet of the room, I realized something. I wasn't running anymore. I didn't need to. I had found my place, my purpose, and it wasn't tied to this house or the memories it held. It was mine, and it was in the life I was building now. I turned to leave, my heart feeling lighter than it had in years. I didn't need to carry this weight with me anymore. The past was behind me, and I was ready to embrace the future. I stepped out of the house and back into the world, feeling like I had finally closed a chapter one had left open for too long. I wasn't just moving forward with James, with my career, with everything I had worked for. I was moving forward with myself. And that, I realized, was the most important thing of all. As I stood on the balcony that evening, the city lights stretched out before me, each one representing a piece of the life I had built over the past few years. The soft hum of the world around me seemed distant, and I realized how much had changed, how far I had come. Looking back, I could hardly believe the journey. It had been filled with ups and downs, moments of doubt and fear, but also moments of growth, joy, and clarity. And now, standing here, I felt a sense of peace I had never experienced before. I wasn't who I used to be. I had learned to trust myself, to embrace the unknown, and to step into a future that was mine to shape. I had worked hard to get here, and every challenge I had faced had prepared me for what lay ahead. The past, with all its mistakes and lessons, no longer held me back. I had forgiven myself and others. The weight of old grudges, the fear of failure, the doubts about my worth, they had all started to fade. What remained was the certainty that I was capable of handling whatever came next. And I wasn't alone in it. James had been by my side through it all, offering support, love, and the strength to face challenges I once thought impossible. Our relationship had grown from something uncertain into a partnership that felt solid, built on mutual respect, trust, and a shared vision of the future. It wasn't always easy. There were still moments of uncertainty, moments when we had to pause and ask ourselves if we were truly ready for the next step. But each time we faced those questions, we came out stronger, more connected. We had found a rhythm, a way to move forward together, even when the road was unclear. I thought back to the times when I was lost, unsure of where I was headed. I had spent so much time worrying about what might go wrong, about the future that seemed so uncertain. But now, I realized that the future wasn't something to fear. It was something to build. It was mine to create, just as it was James's to create. I wasn't chasing anyone else's dream anymore. I was chasing my own, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid to see where it would take me. The phone buzzed in my pocket, interrupting my thoughts. It was a message from James. "Are you free tonight? I was thinking we could go out and celebrate. You've come so far, and I want to remind you how proud I am of you." A smile spread across my face as I read his message. It felt so simple, yet so significant. We had come so far, and here we were, still moving forward together, still building something real. I texted back, "I'd love that. Let's do it." As I got ready for the evening, I couldn't help but reflect on everything that had brought me to this moment. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every step. I had learned to embrace the uncertainty, to trust that things would fall into place when I was ready to face them. And most importantly, I had learned that the future wasn't something to wait for. It was something to create. James and I met at the restaurant later that evening, and as we sat down to dinner, I couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude for everything that had brought us here. The quiet conversations, the shared moments of laughter, the challenges we had faced, they had all led to this. And for the first time, I felt like we were truly building something together. We didn't know what the future held, but we were ready to face it side by side. "I'm proud of you, Sarah," James said, his voice sincere. "You've worked so hard to get here, and I know you're going to do amazing things." His words filled me with warmth, and I realized how much he had become a part of my journey. We had both changed, and it was clear that we were no longer the same people who had met that day in the cafe. We had grown, together and apart, and now, we were ready to move forward in ways we hadn't even imagined. "I'm proud of you too," I said, reaching across the table to take his hand. "We've both come a long way, and I'm excited to see where we go from here." We sat there for a while, just enjoying the quiet, savoring the moment. I had never felt more certain of the future than I did right then. The journey wasn't over. It had only just begun, and whatever came next, I knew that I was ready for it. Ready to keep growing, ready to keep loving, and ready to keep building. Together, discover an inspiring journey in this powerful story filled with emotional twists, challenges, and personal growth. Follow a determined woman who is ready to step into a new chapter of her life while facing her past and building a future with the support of someone who truly believes in her. As the story unfolds, we see the main character confront family struggles, career decisions, and the complexities of love, all while learning to trust herself and the people around her. This journey through transformation, empowerment, and healing will resonate with anyone who has ever faced doubts or difficult choices. Dive into these Black stories that explore the richness of overcoming obstacles, personal discovery, and the beauty of finding strength in unexpected places. These Black stories offer valuable lessons on resilience, love, and growth. Each step in this journey takes the character closer to understanding what truly matters, creating a life filled with purpose, and learning that healing starts from within. These Black stories are not just about overcoming struggles, but about embracing the power of change and accepting the future with open arms. Follow along as the main character embarks on a path to self-discovery, while tackling complex relationships and the fear of failure, ultimately learning how to live life on her own terms. This powerful collection of Black stories reminds us that no matter how challenging life can be, growth is possible when you trust in yourself and those who support you.